let's jump into today's episode where we are trying to predict the 2026 Formula One grid. Last year during this big break before Austin, we predicted the 2025 grid and probably got a lot of that right. I don't know. I'd have to go back and listen to it. But as far as I know, we know wheel and we are Formula One geniuses. So we're probably going to get a lot right again today. You ready to jump into it?
I'm ready. I think we should encourage everyone to go back and listen to that episode and then comment down below. Were we right? Were we not?
Maybe don't, because we have come quite a long ways in our podcasting since then, but we appreciate you guys going on the journey with us. Let's jump right into it, starting with Red Bull. In 2026, I think it will be Max Verstappen and Liam Lawson driving that Red Bull. I have been impressed with what I have seen from Liam Lawson so far, and no one can convince me that them putting Liam into the seat for these last 6 races aren't an audition for a 2025 Red Bull seat, much less a 2026 Red Bull seat. If he could jump in last year and match Yuki Tsunoda and beat Yuki Tsunoda on multiple occasions, I think we're in for a fight for the rest of this year, and I certainly would expect Liam Lawson to beat Yuki Tsunoda over a full season should they be teammates in 2025. In my mind, even though he has a contract, there is no way that Sergio Perez is in that seat in 2026. I personally don't think he'll be in it in 2025. If I was remaking my 2025 predictions, I'd probably put Liam Lawson in that car because I guarantee that is why he's in that V-Carb seat right now. But for 2026, at least, I think it will be Max Verstappen and Liam Lawson driving for Red Bull.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's going to be Max Verstappen and Liam Lawson. But, talking about that, the audition for the 2025 Red Bull seat, Christian has come out and said that that's kind of what they're looking at, is who is going to be able to be in that seat in 2025. He even said that if Liam doesn't perform and if Sergio doesn't perform, they know what Daniel's capabilities are. So
don't even get my hopes up. Don't even talk about that right now. There's no chance Daniel Ricciardo gets that 2025 Red Bull seat. Unfortunately, The storybook ending is over. It's over.
Very sad day. I'm finally coming to grips that I will over the next few months. But yeah, I think it's definitely an audition for Liam for 2025 and 26, 2025 and beyond, really. And maybe for Yuki as well. I believe Christian also mentioned Yuki's name in there, but that's not actually legitimate. He's just saying that to cover himself. But yeah, I think Red Bull, Max Verstappen, Liam Lawson, 2026.
Moving on to McLaren, I think they'll have the same driver lineup they have right now. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri are one of the strongest driver lineups on the grid. I see no reason why McLaren would want to change that. The only way I see this driver lineup changing is if Oscar Piastri just splatters Lando Norris next year. Then I could see Lando Norris maybe wanting to get out and go somewhere else, almost like a Sebastian Vettel 2014 Red Bull leaving to go to Ferrari. But I don't necessarily see that happening either, because I still think McLaren could be a championship contending team from 2026 on. I think Lando Norris could see himself being a champion in that team. If Oscar beats Lando next year, I think it will be rather close. I don't see a splattering happening at McLaren. So I do think they will have the same driver lineup in 2026 of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri.
Yeah, I also agree with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in the cars in 2026. But it's also interesting to think about. Say that does happen. Oscar demolishes Lando in 2025. Lando's wanting out. The question then becomes, where does he go that is going to be a championship contending team? Because I don't know if there'd be availability for him at the other top teams being the teams that are at the top right now. That could change, but I almost think that maybe he might be discouraged from that because there might not be an option that isn't a step down. So
at Ferrari, it's got to be Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. There's no way you break up that driver lineup after 1 year. Having said that, Fernando and Lewis only lasted as teammates for 1 year, so maybe something crazy does happen. It absolutely boils over and one of them wants out. I don't see that happening. Charles Leclerc is Ferrari's golden boy. I think he'll stay that. I think he'll be the number one driver at Ferrari, even though Lewis Hamilton comes with the pedigree that he does. Unfortunately, he is just getting older and time catches up with everybody. I think if you watch him over the past couple years, he's still a phenomenal driver, but it is clear that he is not the Lewis Hamilton of 2019, 2020, 2021. He has fallen back from that just a little bit. Still an incredible driver. Everybody hear that before you slander me in the comments. Lewis Hamilton is still a top 5 driver on the grid, all right? It is just clear that he is back a little bit from when he was absolutely dominating. But I do think that will probably be the strongest driver lineup on the grid. I don't see a reason for them to break it up. So Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari in 2026.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think Lewis is, yes, he has taken a bit of a step back, but I think it's mainly because he was dominating for so long. He wasn't really used to having a car that didn't run at the top of the field, and I think, he kind of, Lewis has always had a great car, really, honestly, his entire career. And, he kind of didn't, maybe he forgot what it was like to kind of fight towards the middle of the pack. I don't know. I feel like I'm probably going to get slandered in the comments for that as well. But, again, Lewis is a great driver, and I, fully expect, if Ferrari can get the car right, them to be in the Constructors' Championship conversation with that driver lineup. Definitely think that's probably the strongest lineup in the grid as well. But it'll be really fun to watch them race together.
Mercedes, I'm going to go with George Russell and Kimi Antonelli. That's what they've got for 2025. They've been hyping up Kimi Antonelli. In my mind, there's no way they move away from him after 1 year, even if it is like a early Max Verstappen year where he crashes a lot. I think he's going to show some speed. I think he will beat George Russell on a fair few occasions. Maybe not finish the year in front of him because of some crashes and things like that. But I think he will be a quick driver to watch next year. And then George Russell, I think he's ready to step into the team leader role. I mean, they brought George Russell into this team to be the team leader once Lewis Hamilton left. And now that that's happening, I think George Russell is ready to step into that role. And yes, you can say that he is behind Lewis in a pretty big points gap, but he's had more reliability issues than Lewis, I think, of Silverstone, and he had that disqualification, which really wasn't on him after an awesome drive. So he's lost like 43 points at a minimum, maybe 52 points if you think about it. So George Russell definitely could be up there in the standings more than he is this year. So I think he's having a much better year this year than he did last year. I'm sure he's ready to be that number one driver. So George Russell, Kimi Antonelli at Mercedes in 2026.
Yeah, no surprise there. I also agree with that prediction. I mean, you said it all. It makes no sense for them to move away from Kimi Antonelli. He is the prodigal child of Mercedes right now, and he's only 17 years old. So for them to move away from him at this point after 1 year doesn't make any sense at all. And they've also invested a lot in George Russell. I mean, for like 6-7 years, even down in his junior career, they were investing in George Russell, preparing him to hopefully take over the role he's about to one day. And I think George is more than ready for it. He's a great driver. One thing I like about George is that he kind of always keeps his cool, and I think that's what they need with Kimi in the car as well. Being a young kid, learning a lot about Formula One, not only how to drive the car, but interact with others in the team, on the track and off the track too. I think George would be a good example.
Aston Martin, now that we have finally agreed for 4 teams straight, let's disagree about something. Aston Martin, I've gone for Fernando Alonso and Yuki Tsunoda. I don't fully believe this. I mean, if you were Justin pick for $1 million, I'd probably put Lance Stroll in that second seat as well. But just for the sake of not picking Lance Stroll and hoping that his dad is let's go put you in endurance racing or something, I'm serious about winning a championship. Yuki Tsunoda makes the most sense. Obviously, Honda is moving over starting in 2026 because that makes perfect sense to have the most popular English racing team have Japanese engines in the back. But that is Formula One right now. We're not even talking about Renault getting some German engines, but that is beyond the point as well. But Fernando Alonso, Yuki Tsunoda, I think Fernando is going to want to drive until he's 50 because he's finally got Adrian Newey designing a fast car for him, and he might have a shot at a world championship if Aston Martin is 3 seconds ahead at the beginning of 2026. And then Yuki Tsunoda just makes sense with Honda. So that is my official Aston Martin 2026 pairing of Fernando Alonso and Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah, I've gone with Fernando Alonso as well. I think, also the experience that Adrian Newey has of working with Honda and designing a car around a Honda engine will be really valuable for Aston Martin. I think that was bringing in Honda was probably key to getting Adrian to sign, as well as all the money that they threw at him. So I think that's going to be a really fun thing to watch. I agree. I think Fernando's going to kind of get that second wind, third wind, fourth wind, fifth wind, whatever you want to call it. And he's going to be really excited and motivated to race a car designed by Adrian Newey. But I've gone with keeping Lance Stroll in the seat. I think it's just like the safe move for Aston Martin. Lance is going to, have some crashes. He'll have some decent performances. He's probably not going to get as much as he should out of the car, but he'll probably get enough. And it just kind of depends on, I guess, how Aston Martin does in 2025, I think, whether they keep Lance or not. Because if they're up near the front in 2025 and they're really serious about winning a championship, I definitely could see them going a different way with that. And maybe bringing in Yuki and some more sponsors from the, Japanese motorsport world to bring in more money to the team might be helpful. But I think the way I see it right now, Lance Stroll is kind of the safe move. He's like the fallback plan.
Moving on to VCarb, who knows if they will still be called that in 2026 or if they will even still be a Red Bull Junior team in 2026 with everything going on with Red Bull right now. But assuming all things stay the same, I think it will be Isaac Hadjar and Arvid Lindbald in that team. That just makes sense. They are the two drivers being talked about the most in the Red Bull Junior program right now. Isaac might even win F2 this year. That would be another unfortunate story of the Formula 2 champion not being able to compete in that series and then not having a Formula 1 seat to go into, but he is the reserve driver for Red Bull and VCarb right now since Liam Lawson went into that seat. So I think if there is an open seat at VCarb, Isaac will be the next one to get it. And then Arvid, he will be competing in F2 next year. Had a very impressive season in F3 this year, and then obviously for him to be spoken of by Christian Horner and Helmut Marko as the last Red Bull Junior they put on their list of people who are ready for Formula One. I think if we get to 2026 and they're truly moving back to this being a junior team and wanting to prepare junior drivers, then this is the lineup that makes the most sense to me. Yeah,
I agree with that. I think Isaac Hadjar definitely has to be in that seat in 2026. Just with him, doing so well in F2 and, now being the reserve driver, I think that just makes sense. And for the second seat, I really debated on who to put in there, but I think at the end of the day, you said it right. The drivers in the junior program that are being talked about are Isaac Hadjar and Arvid Lindbald. And if you're not being talked about by Christian Horner and Helmut Marko, you don't really have a shot being on the grid anytime soon if you're in the Red Bull Junior program. So that's the way I see it. It just makes a lot of sense. Arvid is going to be moving up. He had a great season in F3 this year, and who knows, maybe he'll do really well in F2 like he did in F3.
For Haas, I've gone with Ollie Behrman and Esteban Ocon. Obviously, that driver lineup is the same from what it will be in 2025. Unless Ollie Behrman is horrible, I don't think you get rid of him after 1 year, especially with the Ferrari backing and Ferrari being Haas's engine suppliers. I think that makes a lot of sense to me. And I don't think he's going to be horrible because everything we've seen from Ollie Behrman so far has been really good. And then Esteban Ocon, I could see him being kicked out if Ollie Behrman proves that he is ready to be the team leader of Haas and they can bring someone else in. But Esteban Ocon is an experienced driver, could fill that Nico Hulkenberg role within that team. And so I think it makes sense to keep him for multiple years as well. So I think Ollie Behrman and Esteban Ocon will be driving for Haas in 2026.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think Ollie's going to do great next year. I think my personal feeling is that he's going to step out and kind of prove that he is the number one at Haas. Esteban, I just don't see him filling like a Nico Hulkenberg role with Haas. I think that's my prediction, that he'll still be in that seat because for whatever reason, he just seems to get a lot of chances in Formula One, and I don't know why. Maybe he brings in a lot of sponsors. Maybe he knows people. He's got a lot of good connections. But, ultimately performance is your best friend in Formula One, and Esteban hasn't really been performing, in my opinion, well enough to deserve a continued seat in F1 in 2025, let alone 26, but I don't make the rules. Haas is an American team. Think about this. Okay, there is one American driver in the Red Bull Junior program that maybe
we're not getting Logan Sargent back on the grid. Give it up, Brandon.
It's not Logan Sargent, but there's a kid, I should say, in Formula 4 right now. His name is James Igozi. He is in the Red Bull Junior program. Maybe Haas reaches out, snags an American. I don't know. It's crazy. I just wanted to mention his name. Who knows? It could happen.
So moving on to Williams, I think it will be Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. I think that is going to be one of the strongest driver lineups on the grid. Probably the best driver lineup in the midfield for sure. And if Williams are continuing in the right direction, I know that they are targeting 2026 as a chance to really jump up the grid. And I believe in James Vowles as a team principal and all of his ideas and his directions for the team. So I think Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz, they won't really have anywhere else to go that has the promise of moving up the grid. They're both locked into long-term contracts. Alex Albon is 2027, Carlos Sainz is 2027, and maybe even more. They're kind of interesting about that. So I think Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz will remain at Williams for 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the only thing that could change that is something crazy happening. I mean, one of them performing really, really poorly, or another young, really fast driver coming up through the pipeline out of nowhere, and I don't know. So it could happen, but I think the chances are slim to none that lineup changes beyond 2025. Like you said, they're both under contract through 27 at least, so it doesn't make sense that they would have somebody else in the seat in 26.
Speaking of Franco Colapinto, though, I think he will be one of Alpine drivers in 2026. This is kind of a shot in the dark. I don't really know if this is going to happen. It's just I want to see Franco on the grid, and this is really where it makes the most sense, mainly because Alpine is switching to Mercedes engines, and we know that there's kind of been a little driver sharing between teams and Williams and Mercedes engines and all of that. So Franco Colapinto could find his way onto the grid with Alpine. Maybe at that point as well, Williams will decide that there's not room for him in their team, like we almost saw with Liam Lawson, and he could be free to sign somewhere else. I think his performances this year have been enough to warrant him consideration for a 2026 seat. I think he'll be driving alongside Pierre Gasly. I think Pierre Gasly pretty much came into Alpine and immediately established himself as the team leader of Alpine. Obviously, Alpine has been terrible this year, and he hasn't really gotten to show it. So I'm really going to base this off of last year. And even though the points tally at the end of the year didn't show it because of some reliability and Esteban Ocon getting lucky a couple times, Pierre Gasly walloped Esteban Ocon. I mean, at one point last year, he almost had double the points of him, had a huge point gap. And so I think Pierre Gasly will be the team leader there at Alpine. This isn't anything against Jack Doohan. I know he is signed to drive there for 2025. As far as I know, I only saw it was a one-year contract, so they're not committing super long-term to Jack Doohan. And I just don't necessarily believe in him as much as some of the other younger drivers. Maybe it's because we haven't seen proof of concept of him in a Formula One car yet. He has performed well in the free practices that he's done, but I just don't think he is getting as much hype as the younger drivers. But then again, Ollie Behrman's like 16th in F2 this year. And so, maybe junior resume doesn't mean as much as it used to. And it's just what can you do in a Formula One car once you get there. So I'm not rooting against Jack Doohan. I just don't think he will have a super long career in Formula One. I think he'll be replaced by Franco Colapinto to drive alongside Pierre Gasly in 2026.
I fully expect Pierre to remain in that seat in 26, but I think Jack Doohan will be in the car. One thing that Australians have an amazing track record for in Formula One is just being really likable drivers. You've got Mark Webber. I think he was a really likable driver. Then Daniel Ricciardo. Now we have Oscar Piastri. And then we have Jack Doohan. You haven't really seen much of him. He's kind of seems to me like maybe a little bit quieter of a guy, a little bit more reserved. But I fully expect him to be just a really good Aussie driver. And I think he's going to be really likable. The Australians love their drivers. They love Formula One. So I think that support and backing from his home crowd will certainly spur him on and help him perform well. And I think he'll do enough to earn the seat in 26.
The last team on the grid, it will be Audi by that point, no longer Sauber. It will be a new team. I think Nico Hülkenberg will still be there. They've kind of picked him to be the team leader for this project. Makes sense. Audi is a German manufacturer. Nico Hülkenberg is a German driver. It just all makes sense. And then I think Gabriel Bortoleto will be the other driver in that team. I think he makes sense. He is a Sauber junior. He's kind of in the running for that seat for 2025. You can make the argument for Valtteri Bottas. You can make the argument for Zane Maloney. They've got to throw their hats in there as well. If I had to pick, I know that's the only seat open for 2025. I think it'll be Valtteri for 2025 on a one-year contract, and then Gabriel for 2026. So I think that will be the Audi driver lineup in 2026.
Yeah, I think Nico Hülkenberg will definitely be there just to kind of get this project going, be kind of the poster child of the brand new German Formula One team, having a German driver. And I've gone with Franco Colapinto for the second seat. I think, like we talked about earlier, he's done enough to certainly warrant his name in the conversation for that seat in 2025. He's been talked about it a little bit. I don't necessarily think that'll happen. I think Valtteri is probably the one that's going to get the seat. I feel like Valtteri is the safest bet of the available drivers for 2025. But I think depending on how Franco continues to perform this season and his availability next season and kind of what the Williams situation looks like, which I think, like we said, largely looks like it'll be kind of locked up for quite some time. So I think they might release him to sign somewhere else, and I think Audi would be a great project for him to hop on.
But that is all we've got for this episode of the Podium Pushers podcast. Brandon, what are your parting podium thoughts?
Parting podium thoughts is this was a fun episode. I'm excited got one more episode we'll be recording before we go to Austin, and then we'll be recapping our experience, which I'm also really excited for. So it's going to be great. Formula One is almost back on track. And I'm excited to do this and be there, and just, it's a really fun time to be a Formula One fan. So I'm excited.
We are officially single digits away from going to Austin. Pumped for that. We will be taking you guys along for the ride, so be sure to follow us on all of the social medias to check out what is going on at Circuit of the Americas for the United States Grand Prix. But thank you so much for listening or watching to another episode of the Podium Pushers podcast. We truly would appreciate if you liked, followed, subscribed, did all of the things wherever you are watching or listening. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all the podcast platforms, wherever you are. We are there. We will see you next week to predict the United States Grand Prix. See ya.
See ya.